My name is Vadims. I'm excited to announce the release of our new Light Cinematic Tool, a complete solution for enhancing lighting in Unreal Engine scenes, available for Unreal Engine 5.5 and future versions. This is our third product in our Argentum pipeline series. Our goal within the series is to share the same tools we use internally in production, helping push real-time cinematic rendering forward and making advanced lighting workflow more accessible to the community. I also highly recommend checking out our other project, Hair Cinematic Tool 2.0. It's specifically designed to improve how hair react to lighting in real time, providing more realistic highlights, depth and softness. If you're aiming for high-end cinematic character quality, this tool is a strong addition to your pipeline. In this video, I'll walk you through all the settings inside the Light Cinematic Tool, and we'll use a pre-built scene to demonstrate how to enhance lighting step by step. Before we start, we need to ensure that our project settings and post-process volume is set up correctly. In the project settings, just to follow what we have on the screen. This will enable us the highest possible render settings. Now we can set up post-process volume. This is where Lighting Cinematic Tool does most of its work. We need to ensure that we are using hit light for reflection, we're using Lumen. Additionally, we need to ensure that screen traces and mega lights are off. The screen tracing is older technique, and while it can help in some scenarios, it's also one of the most common sources of artifacts. With mega lights, based on internal testing and production trials, mega lights are still early stage. Please be aware that we need to ensure that max roughness to trace is set up to 1. This ensures that hit lighting for reflection traces across the full roughness range, not just up to the default 0.4. This is critical for believable cinematic reflections on rough and semi-rough surfaces. Now our post-process volume and rendering settings are set up. We'll begin with Directional Light setup only. At this stage, I want to show you how the tool interacts with the standard Unreal Engine lighting setup, and why with modern real-time global illumination we can still encounter blemishes, shadow instabilities and lighting artifacts. In Unreal Engine 4, ray tracing worked largely out of the box, but it relied heavily on baked data and recomputed solutions. This approach was stable, but not very flexible for cinematic iterations. Now we finally can start using our tool. The Enable on Play is enabled by default. This ensures that the changes you're going to make will be visible in Movie Render Queue. If you enable Use Cinematic Settings, you will be able to see the changes you make in Viewport. Now we're moving to Surface Cache Sampling Depth Bias. For a visual representation, we're going to Lumen Surface Cache Debug view. Everything you see here that looks fuzzy or color-based is part of the Lumen scene representation. You also noticed that you have yellow and pink areas in the scene. Yellow areas means these surfaces are not fully represented in Lumen scene, but they still contribute through Screen Probe Gather. The pink areas indicate geometry that is completely excluded from the Lumen scene. The pink geometry does not contribute correctly to global illumination or reflection and is a very common source of lighting artifacts. How we can fix this? In some cases, pink areas can be fixed by increasing Lumen mesh cards. If we're gonna double click on the mesh and find the settings Lumen mesh cards, we can increase this sample count. We click apply and re-evaluate the scene. This improves the surface coverage and can resolve the missing lighting data. By increasing surface cache sampling depth bias, for instance in this case for 35, we can see that whole scene is now working with Lumen. We don't have any pink artifacts. In this example I prepared from the previous scenes, we can see that in first scene, whole wall, some carpets, they're not part of the Lumen scene. After tweaking this setting, we can see that most of the pink areas disappeared. And same on the second sample as well. However, this method does not work in all cases. Some assets, materials or scale issues will still cause exclusion, which is why lighting control at the render and post-process level is essential. Now we're moving to Lumen Reflection Specular Scale. This setting allows you to adjust global specular for art direction. Try work within the range 1 and 2. default is 1, but using this setting for art direction, you still can tweak your scene. In cases where there's too many reflections, you can decrease it, or you can increase it if there's not enough. You still can try to tweak it. In cases such as sunset or sunrise lighting, some meshes might also produce artifacts that look like small fibers or hair-looking outlines around the geometry edges. In this case, there's two options how you can deal with it. The first, you can disable ray tracing and the artifact disappear. But disabling ray tracing will remove these ray tracing shadows, so the shadows won't be looking so smooth. What you can do is disable the shadow denoiser, but it will produce the artifacts in the shadows. But don't be worried, we can fix that as well. Go to your directional light and increase sample per pixel. In this case, we're going to put 8. And you can see, we're still using ray tracing, we're using indirection, and all shadows are smooth. We still have ray tracing shadows. Next setting is Indirect Diffuse Debug. When enabled, we can see how indirection works in your scene. You won't see any directional lights or skylight, but you will see all the indirections. So this setting will help you to see how your indirection works. Also remember that every time you change lighting related settings, the skylight needs to be recaptured. This can be done by manually recapturing or simply saving the project so the skylight recalculates itself. Now we're moving to Skylight Debug. Enabling this setting will allow us to see what Skylight sees. Ray tracing needs to be disabled as it does not work with Skylight, but the engine will still gonna send the RT course to it. Lower hemisphere as a solid color is a useful button that can be used to enable bottom layers of your atmosphere or HDR. Now we're moving to sky distance threshold. As you can see, it's by default it's set up for 150,000 centimeters. And it captures everything around that radius. If we're putting on 1, we can see that Skylight now sees all meshes. Be aware that if you're going to change Skylight to the Realtime Skylight, it will start capturing on 150,000 centimeters as a default, and the change in numbers won't take an effect. As we knew that this is a problem in our tool, we have enabled option to enable Realtime Skylight without affecting or defaulting it to 150,000 centimeters. Be aware that enabling this setting will drastically lower your FPS and performance. One important post-process setting is leaking. This is a powerful tool that allows skylight illumination to reach deep corners and occluded areas of the scene. However, it must be used carefully, as it can very easily over-brighten the scene and flatten the contrast if pushed too far. Now we're finished with additional settings, we can go and set up our Light Cinematic Tool. To start, we need to disable Lumen Radiosity. Disabling this will leave only the screen probe gather. screen probe gather, we need to ensure the downsample factor is at minimum, the tracing octagon resolution at maximum, and the max ray intensity to around 12. The next three options are set up as a default because they're found to be most optimized for this tool. For Radiance Cache, we're going to disable it as it's more for games than cinematics. The Spatial Filter is additional denoiser for screen probe gather. We can increase it slightly. Temporal Filter is also additional denoiser for screen probe gather. We can increase it to 12 and 12. Temporal Filter Probes is a third denoiser for screen probe gather. We'll leave it as a default, as it's most optimized for this tool. Extra Ambient Occlusion is additional ambient occlusion for your scene. Unfortunately, it works only from version 5.6 and onwards. Now we can enable Lumen Scene Radiosity. Additionally, we have 3D debug here. We can visualize mesh cards, we can visualize texels on each mesh card, and we can visualize Lumen Radiosity probes. Do not worry, these probes are just for debug and does not affect your scene, so we can decrease the spacing. Now update factor. The lower the value, the faster it is. We recommend 32. Update factor direct light is the same parameters as update factor, but for directional light. The higher the value, the faster it is. Hemisphere probe resolution affects the density of radiosity probes, so we will recommend to leave it as default. The probe spacing affects the density of radiosity probes in your scene. Now the setup is complete, we can see that the shadows are behaving correctly. We don't have visual glitches, we don't have the flickering or anything like that. In the next few setups, you will see how shadows behaving. It works perfectly with the Skylight and Directional Light, and even with Emissive Materials. Now we're finished with technical part, let's move on to home interior environment. Before we proceed, let's ensure we have correct project settings. In this scene, we're going to use Directional Light, Exponential Height Fog, Skylight, Sky Atmosphere, and Post-Process. Let's set up Post-Process Volume. We're going to use the same settings we used in the technical part. Now with Post-Process set up, let's set up our Skylight. We're going to use HDR for this scene. We need to ensure that ray tracing is disabled in the Skylight. We will then take lower hemisphere as a solid color just to give us a little bit more highlights. Now we're happy with the Skylight, let's move to Directional Light. We will disable Volumetrics on this one, as we're gonna use the second Directional Light for Volumetrics only. We'll set up priority as 1, so Directional Lights won't fight between each other. I will enable volumetric fog so I can see my directional light. With the main scene almost ready, now we can finally use our Lighting Cinematic Tool. As this tool has a lot of settings, we decided to create a universal preset button. Pressing that will enable settings used by Argentum Studio. They're found to be a good baseline for every scene, but obviously we can tweak each individual settings if it's required. Let's jump in Lumen's Surface Cache Debug and see what we're dealing with. As you can see, scene has a lot of purple meshes that does not work with Lumen. Let's see if we can fix that. Next, maybe we can improve shadows a little bit. To do that, we're gonna disable Denoiser and we're gonna add some pixel per samples in our Directional Light. Let's check the rest of the settings to ensure that all the default values are applied. Let's check our extra ambient occlusion. Maybe we can increase it or decrease it. I think 0.3 is fine. Now with all tools set up, let's see the difference in all three cameras. As you can see, there is no shadow inconsistencies, no blemishes or no flickering lights. Now let's jump to camera 2 and see the difference. Now we're jumping to the third camera and the last one, and see what difference is there. Maybe we can tweak reflections slightly. As you can see, this tool brings light and shadows to another level. Environment from this demo can be found on Fab. This is a home interior environment created by Olga Chekunova. Additionally, we relighted coffee shop environment created by the artist studios. Level sequences for both environments can be found in Lighting Cinematic Tool's Lighting Look Dev folder. Let's open sequence for home interior environment and see what we have inside. There are few subsequences in this level sequence. Each one is a different lighting setup. Now let's move to coffee shop environment. To do that, we need to open Showcase level that is located in Maps folder. And again, we're gonna open level sequence located in our Light Cinematic Tool folder. This level sequence as well will have multiple subsequences with the different presets. In case any item in level sequence is red, we can fix that. In your level sequence, click on the spanner, go to Advanced, and click on Fix Actor References. Thank you for your time during this tutorial, and I hope you'll find this Lighting Cinematic Tool as a good addition to your cinematic tool belt.